in accordance with Governor Newsom's Executive Order N2920. To begin, all SAC members and staff are unmuted. Please mute your device until you are ready to speak. To avoid feedback and background noise, then unmute yourself to comment or respond. Committee members should only use the chat feature for meeting management and not use it to engage in substantive discussion. Members of the public are muted with video off upon joining the meeting, but will be unmuted for public comments and questions. I will call for general public comment at item 2, then again for each separate agenda item. Comments are limited to 3 minutes. There are 3 options for public comments. You may indicate in the chat feature during the item discussion that you wish to be called upon. You may write your question or comment in the chat feature, or when public comments are open, Tara will unmute all members of the public, and you may verbally state your name and indicate that you have a question or comment. Kathy Martin is our timekeeper, and she will advise when the 3 minutes is up, and then your mic will be muted after a brief pause. Public comment can also be sent via email or mail. Please refer to the agenda for the specifics. Any public comments received via email or in writing after 2:30 p.m. today will be hosted on the website by tomorrow, all of which becomes part of the record. As we go through the agenda, I will introduce each agenda item and the presenter. At the end of each presentation, I will ask the committee for any questions of the presenter. And again, members are asked to use the raise hand feature on Zoom or otherwise signal verbally or visually mentioned in the chat. Please wait to be called on. If it appears we have many questions, I may use alphabetical order to call on committee members. I will then call for public comments. The committee may then discuss any further discussion on the item and or the public comments. Again, use the raised hand feature and wait to be recognized before speaking. Today's PowerPoint actually were sent out earlier today, and the PowerPoint will be shown during this meeting and is now available on the website. So now, Tara, I'm going to send it to you to take roll. Please be ready to unmute as you sense your name coming through the alphabet. Thank you.
Dan Masnada.
Here.
Roy Marson. Sandra Cattell.
I'm here.
Stacy Fortner. Dennis Ostrom. Oh, sorry. Dennis Ostrom. Dennis, I saw you earlier. I feel like you're secretly here. All right. No, Dennis Ostrom. Steve. Steve Sly.
He's muted, but he's here. I can hear him speaking.
Okay.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now perfectly.
I don't get it. I'm unmuted, but okay.
Matt Carpenter.
I'm here.
Eric Adair.
I'm here.
Holly Schroeder.
Present.
And that's it.
Fantastic. All right, so the first item is public comment. Tara, Kathy, is there anybody who has signed up for general public comment?
There's no one signed up, and I just asked all to unmute. So everyone should be allowed to speak. Is there anyone who would like to speak?
Is there anyone who would like to speak in public comment?
Nope, not at this time.
Okay, moving on to general items. First, we have the minutes from our November 18th committee meeting. Ask people to hopefully you have reviewed. Is there a motion to approve?
Move to approve. This is Eric.
Thank you, Eric.
This is Matt. I'll second.
Thank you. Any comments, corrections? And I believe we do have to do roll call. So Tara, back to you. Hopefully you know where you are in line now. Tara?
Yes, what was that?
Roll call for minutes.
Roll call for minutes. Dan Masnada.
Yes.
Sandra Cattell.
Yes.
Stacy Fortner.
Yes.
Steve Sly.
Yes.
Matt Carpenter. Eric
Yes.
Adair. Holly Schroeder.
Yes. All right.
All right.
Minutes are approved. Next item is going into our discussion. As you guys all recall, at the last meeting in November, we had sort of a general discussion and orientation and background on the sustainability criteria, goal and criteria. And so Rick Vergoots is on here, and I believe Rick and perhaps Jeff are going to lead us through this discussion and share that PowerPoint, as I understand.
Yeah, that's right, Holly. And we're going to do something similar to last time. Jeff is going to run through the PowerPoint, and I'm here too for the discussion and other questions. So.
All right. Happy New Year, everybody. Can you see my screen yet?
Not yet.
Let's go here. Let's try that. How about now?
There
Now
you
we
go.
can.
Yep.
Awesome. Happy New Year, everybody. All right. So recall that Rick gave an overview presentation of sustainable management criteria, how they're set, definitions. Today's presentation is the 3 that are planned. We have yet another one that's planned for, I believe it's January 27th. So we're really looking forward to your input. As we go forward here, we're going to get into a little more detail as we go. Also, just so everyone knows, we're working on a written chapter that describes the sustainable management criteria that'll include elements that you've seen today in the next meeting as well. So look forward to your feedback as we complete that document. Okay. Why isn't it going? Here. Okay. So the topics for today are we're going to review just a brief review of our sustainable management criteria development steps. We're going to review a proposed sustainability goal. Recall that Rick gave an overview of some options and examples last time. We're going to present a goal for you to consider. Won't be the last time you'll see it, but just as a straw man, we're going to review example indicators of what we call undesirable results for groundwater levels, for groundwater in storage, and for subsidence. There'll be other indicators that we're going to review at our next meeting, including degradation, groundwater quality, water quality in general, and then also depletion of interconnected surface water, and particularly as it relates to GDE. So stay tuned for that meeting. Next, we're going to review the proposed minimum thresholds and measurable objectives. And we'll have an opportunity to revisit our sustainability goal, and then we'll talk about next steps. So the process that we've been through, you've seen this slide before. This is the steps that are laid out by DWR. Start with our basin conditions. We then go to initial sustainability goals. We talk about what are undesirable effects or undesirable results that are significant and unreasonable in the basin. We then move on to, okay, how are we going to determine whether or not we are operating the basin sustainably? And so that's where these minimum thresholds and measurable objectives, quantitative measures are. And we'll talk about those and how conceptually we've set those or are going to set those. And then if necessary, if we find that we have an undesirable result for some reason, after looking at all of our indicators and our criteria, then we would consider as another future action to look at projects and management actions that are necessary to address that undesirable result. You can see that if that's necessary, we would ask the question, a question that's often asked at that stage as well. Can we afford to reach those goals? Have we set the levels such that it's going to be millions and millions of dollars to reach those goals, and maybe we need to reconsider. And that's why we have this iteration step where we might go back and revisit our sustainability goals, undesirable results, minimum thresholds, measurable objectives. So that's just to show that this is intended to be an iterative process. All right. So here is a proposed sustainability goal. And I'll just read it briefly. The goal of this GSP is to sustainably manage the groundwater resources of the Upper Santa Clara River Basin for current and future beneficial uses of groundwater.
I'm monitoring this Zoom. Why? I'm muted.
Including the river environment through an
Why, were you scheduled?
that builds on robust science and monitoring and considers economic, social, and other objectives of a wide variety.
What time?
Hunt, you are not actually muted. Now you are. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So from there, we're going to cover briefly some objectives for meeting these sustainability goals. So we want to maintain groundwater levels that continue to support current groundwater uses in a healthy river environment in the basin. We want to maintain groundwater volumes in storage that are sufficient to sustain current and planned future groundwater use in prolonged droughts, while avoiding permanent degradation of the environmental values. And we want to reduce or prevent land subsidence that causes significant or unreasonable effects on critical infrastructure or property interests. So those are our objectives related to achieving our goal. So with that, I think I'll just pause for a moment and see if there are any comments or questions regarding the goal or objectives or anything that we've discussed so far.
This is Sandra, and I
Hi.
have a question already. That all of the materials that I have seen us go through have done a very good job, but have focused on the areas west, approximately near Soledad and Sierra Highway and moving west. And my concern is now for the area that is east of that intersection to the edge of our purview, which is actually just outside the city of Santa Clarita. And the reason I bring this up is there are a lot of people that have wells in the area who depend on the wells, and they're having problems with their wells. And it seems to me that those areas need to be not merely included, but we really need to focus on them because those are the lifebloods of those people.
All right. Well, I appreciate that comment. And just to reiterate, this plan is supposed to cover the entire basin. So we're really not intending to exclude any particular area. And so I am familiar with some of the issues that you're talking about, and we'll definitely take that into consideration, Sandra.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a comment or question?
I don't see anything, and I don't see anything in chat, so let's go ahead and proceed.
Okay, we'll move on. So how are undesirable results defined? DWR requires that basin stakeholders decide what the undesirable effects are for these different indicators that they've laid out. And so we're going to take a shot at some of these right now. Let us know if we've missed the mark somehow. But I'll lay out a few key things that are important for defining what an undesirable result is. So there must be significant and unreasonable effects caused by pumping to either long-term sustainable groundwater production or other beneficial uses, including GDEs and threatened or endangered species. The results, these undesirable effects or results exceed minimum thresholds in the specified number of representative wells or representative monitoring sites that we'll have throughout the basin. But these criteria may be refined based on monitoring data and analysis. So They're not necessarily carved in stone. So just want to lay that out there for folks. So I'd like to go through some example indicators of undesirable results, and please let me know if you're aware of other effects or undesirable results that we really need to take into consideration. So this first one, this first indicator or first undesirable effect is called chronic lowering of groundwater levels. And let me refresh everyone's memory of what that is. This is a graphic that basically shows groundwater level here on the left-hand side of the graph, and on the bottom we have time. This one says 1985 to 2040. This is just an example. This is not from our basin. This is an example from a representative well in this basin. And you can see that the water levels are declining, and you can also see that there's seasonal or annual fluctuations in water levels that you might expect as climate changes and varies over time. We want to avoid this effect, this downward trend. Okay, so that's what we mean by an undesirable result. So groundwater elevations drop below minimum thresholds in 10% of the representative wells. Now, you say, well, what's the basis for 10%? Well, frankly, we just decided that seemed like a reasonable number. We could consider others. We just didn't want it to be one well in the basin that exceeds the threshold, means the whole basin's out of compliance. So that's why we said 10% of the representative wells. We also need to consider the rate or magnitude of the decline, the rate of decline in water levels. And we're setting that based on future predicted changes in water level based on future climate and future land use, future groundwater pumping. And we don't want to see that occur in more than 10% of representative wells. For both of these undesirable results, we also have to consider potential impacts to GDEs, and we'll get into that a little more later, and more so in our next presentation on the 27th. Second is chronic reduction of groundwater in storage. And again, what do we mean by that? Well, here's a graph, similar graph. It basically shows here on the left-hand side estimated available groundwater storage, and then time is over here. You can see it fluctuates widely, but there's a downward trend, which is very much tied to groundwater levels. So as you drain out or remove water from the groundwater system, from the pore spaces in the aquifer, you're going to reduce the volume of groundwater in storage, and that's what we're trying to avoid, that continued downward trend. So for this, an undesirable result example might be water level declines caused by pumping in 10% of the wells, thereby reducing the volume of groundwater in storage, such that there is insufficient supply to support pumping during extended drought. So we want to have enough water in storage to make sure we can get through that long-term, that longer period drought conditions. We don't want to maintain water levels right at the minimum and then expect to be able to get through the drought. So it's a important consideration. Lastly, I show here land subsidence that substantially interferes with surface land uses. So that includes land surface deformation, differential settlement, broken pipes, damaged roads. And the criteria would basically be set, or the undesirable result would be set for subsidence greater than the thresholds that we're going to set at 10% of the monitoring locations for subsidence. So I'm going to pause for a moment and see if anyone has any input or comments regarding indicators of undesirable results.
Any questions, comments? We spent a lot of time on the concepts of these, although not those specific examples at the last meeting, but questions, comments?
Okay.
Hey, Jeff, this is Matt
Yeah, hey, Matt.
Carpenter. Just a question with respect to the 10% reduction related to storage using 10% of the wells. Is that stratifying kind of the set of data regarding storage enough? Because 10% of the wells might represent 5% of the storage. or they may represent 50% of the storage. So is there a sweet spot, or is there some other indicator that you use that's more relative to the cumulative storage, I guess, across the basin,
Yeah.
rather than well specific? Just a question.
Yeah, you make a good point, because the basin responds differently to changes in hydrology, weather patterns, pumping, et cetera. We have faults out there. We have different conditions for recharge from the river, et cetera. So the basin does respond differently. What we're trying to do, Matt, is pick a number of representative wells, both for the alluvial aquifer system throughout its length, and also for the Saugus aquifer. And with the intention of trying to, these representative wells would then ideally capture what the variability is in a particular area as represented by that well. So we're going through that process right now to figure that out. In some basins, they see such a difference in the way the basin responds that they set up management areas specific to those areas. They're just different, have unique characteristics. So far, we don't see a need to do that in this basin, but it's something you bring up a good point that we need to keep in mind. So it is when you've got wells that are distributed throughout the basin, we are going to be looking at it overall. I think that if we see that we have a problem that seems to be focused in a particular area, that we might choose to make adjustments to how we define an undesirable result in that area. We might choose to say, we're going to devote some money or time or energy into addressing whatever's causing that problem in that particular area.
Okay, thanks, Jeff.
Okay. So let's talk about minimum thresholds and measurable objectives. I'm laying out some definitions here. I'll just briefly go through as a reminder. So we have the measurable thresholds, or MTs, are quantifiable criteria, typically representing these minimum water levels that we don't want to go below. For example, minimum storage represented by water levels. Water quality levels that we don't want to make worse, things like that. These are quantifiable measures at these key locations, these representative wells. And should we have, concentrations or water levels that exceed these thresholds, we are saying that if you fall below that threshold, you have significant and unreasonable impacts. Okay, and I'm going to add, as a result of pumping or management actions. As a result of the implementation of the GSP. The measurable objectives, on the other hand, they're really goals where we want to set these levels to try to reach so that we maintain water levels at a high enough level to get through the drought.
Well, I mean, it would just be Sandra and Diana like doing crap. There should be somebody else besides Diana.
So we operational
Tara,
flexibility.
can you mute everyone again, please?
Oh my God, sorry.
So we want operational flexibility to be able to move between the minimum threshold and the measurable objectives. We want to be able to operate within that range. And I'll show you in a minute with some graphics and some hydrographs for how we might get there. We're doing that separately for the alluvial aquifer and the Saugus aquifer, as I mentioned, at representative wells. So for minimum thresholds for chronic lowering of water levels, I'm going to present a narrative description of it, and then I'm going to show you some hydrographs of what I mean by this when we set these levels. So right now we're proposing that the lowest predicted water level in 2042 under future conditions of development, pumping, working within the operating plan, with climate change, we want to set those levels at that threshold. And I'll explain why we think that's sustainable in just a moment. And this would be set at each of the representative wells for both the alluvial aquifer and the Saugus aquifer. Now for the Saugus aquifer, we have another concern and consideration, and that is that if water levels drop below the historical low, water level in the alluvium, we would like to implement, we call that's going to be a trigger for implementation of management actions or projects or whatever is necessary to avoid impacts to GDEs. And what we're saying here is that these plants and habitats are adapted to a range of water levels fluctuations. But if you drop that water level below the historical low, then you run the risk of impacting GDEs, which is something we want to avoid. It would not be consistent with our goal for the basin. We'll get into a lot more detail on that in our next meeting on the 27th. I just wanted you to know we're sensitive to it as we set these thresholds. For the measurable objective, we're saying we want to make sure that we have a water level that provides access to consistent water for the operating plan with the pumping plan that's planned out there and for other beneficial uses, including domestic and non-municipal uses, ag uses. And we want that to provide supply for over range of hydrologic periods, dry periods, for example, between 2006 and 2016. So those are the premises for setting the chronic lowering of water level thresholds. I'll show you a map. These are just two examples. One is an alluvial well. I'm going to just show this is NLF G3. I'm sure Matt's familiar with that. And then I'm going to also show you a hydrograph from this Saugus well down in this area. And you'll notice that we have a bunch of other wells shown here on the map. These yellow dots are alluvial wells. The green dots are Saugus pumping wells. And just to orient everybody, here's I-5. Here we have the river, I need to darken that, but you can see the Santa Clara River right here running through the basin from east to west. All right, and this black line representing the basin boundary. Here's Bouquet, there's San Francisco Canyon and Castaic Creek up here. So these are just examples that I'm going to show you. We're working on picking what we would consider to be representative wells. We're working still on what these thresholds should be, but if you just look at the concept and see how, the approach that we're taking and see if you agree. So here's that first well, NLF G3. It's an alluvial observation well. It's about a mile below the Valencia Water Reclamation Plant. And just to orient you to this graph, we have on the left-hand side, groundwater elevation in feet, 860 to 1010. And then across the bottom, we have time from 1980 to present day, okay? These kind of light blue circles that you see here are actual measured static water levels in this well. Dating back, this data set goes back to about 2007, 2008. We have other wells that have older data sets, but that's what we have for this one. Now you'll notice this light blue squiggly line here. That's model predicted historical water level. Model predicted water level. You can see it matches pretty well with the measured. This water level is responding to various climate conditions that occurred since 1980. Various pumping conditions, actual pumping conditions. All the factors that go into this groundwater model that we talked about in the water budget discussion are embodied in this graph. The dark blue line that you see here is what we would predict to occur here at this location under future 2042 conditions. So what we've done is that we projected forward in time at historical hydrology. We've added, working within the operating plan to meet demand. We have increased pumping. We've changed land uses out here by the year 2042. It's full build out, just so everyone knows, full development, full operating plan. And it also includes climate change. So this blue line, this dark blue line represents what you would expect to see for a water level out here with climate change in the year 2042. This was presented in our last, we presented some of these in our, I think, our water budget presentation, but as you can see, we don't see a chronic decline in water levels. We don't see In 2042, we don't see that. Likewise, we did the same simulation for 2072. We did not see that either. So we're confident that the operating plan to meet demand in the future is going to be fine with respect to chronic lowering of water levels. We're not going to have problems with our thresholds. So in this example, we set our minimum threshold at the lowest predicted water level, which was in 2016, summer of 2016 during the drought, the worst of the drought, which you can see historically was pretty bad. This is assuming that you projected that forward in time if that occurred in the future. So we also, here I show that's the lowest predicted water levels. So the measurable objective in this case was set just representing average predicted water level that we'd expect to occur in the future. And we're saying, hey, if we keep the water levels at that level up and down, water levels are going to go up and down depending on climate. We think if we're at this level, we've got plenty of room to pump during an extended drought without going below that minimum threshold line. Let's look at the Saugus example. And again, I want to just point out the key things in this graph. This is NWD 12, New Hall Water District, well 12, deep Saugus well. This is the blue dots represent actual static water level measurements in this well clear back to 1985. We have data. You can see this light blue line is a predicted historical trend in water levels under the historical trend in hydrology and historical pumping up to present. And then we have this dark blue line that is model predicted water level in the year 2042 with future development build out, full build out, with pumping within the operating plan to meet that build out, and also climate change in the year 2042. You can see water levels do drop lower, but as we demonstrated in the water budget analysis that we did, is that these water levels recover. They may fluctuate a lot, but they recover and do not have a down to the right trend in chronic water level decline. So with that, we then said, okay, well, based on this approach we've taken, let's set the initial minimum threshold. I'm calling it initial for the Saugus set at the lowest lowest predicted water level in 2042.
Excuse me, Jeff, could
Yeah.
you explain something to me?
Yeah.
Is the dark blue line is supposed to be the future 2042 elevations.
Yes.
And yet the graph only goes through 2020. So
Yeah,
where do we see the projected groundwater elevations from 2020 to 2042?
Okay, I apologize for that. This scale at the bottom does represent the historical to present time frame for one of that blue line and for the blue dots. If you were to take this historical climate and project it forward in time, you would see this response. So what we should have done is shown you what the dates were going forward here into the future out to 2042. So we're just essentially what you have to do is think about this in terms of that dark blue line, these dark blue lines representing that future condition as if it were repeated in the future. Okay, so these drought conditions which you see here represented, or here in this area, which we know occurred in the past, we're going to say, well, that occurs in the future also, and that's what's represented here.
I have a question. This is Stacy. My first question is on the wells that you chose. I'm curious, are both of the wells, your observation wells, are they west of the 5? Is that what I heard you say?
These are just examples that I pulled for the purpose of this presentation. This well is a Saugus well. It's east of the 5 here in
Oh, okay. So it's like right there. Okay.
yeah. So we're going to have representative wells that continue up into this part of The basin,
Yeah, I think that's what we would like to see, because any of the wells that are west of the 5, uh, aren't they going to be fed from the um isn't there a treatment plant over there that feeds into the, so I'm not sure that that would be fully representative of the basin if
right.
they're, so I'd like to see the wells further east. And then the other question that I had is, looking at your minimum thresholds, I'm wondering why you picked those minimum thresholds when in 2017 we had a lot of the cottonwood forests that died off because of the drought, that was lingering effects of the drought in 2016. So I'm wondering why you picked those minimum thresholds and why you wouldn't pick something a little more reasonable that didn't see as much die off.
Okay. Let me answer both questions. They're both good questions. So I've only picked a couple of wells here that were examples. We are going to have representative wells throughout the basin up in these side canyons and to the east. And so you will see that as part of our document that we're producing to try to cover the basin. As you can see, we have a lot of blank spaces. So there are places that are where we have data gaps, where we don't have well information. So we'll be identifying that as well.
Okay, I would just rather see wells to the east. I mean, I understand why you picked it for this presentation, but I don't think that it's helpful
Okay.
because it's not representative of the whole basin.
Okay. Well, that pertains to this well, which is a shallow alluvial well, because that would see the effects of the water reclamation plant discharges. This Saugus well is much, much deeper and is quite a ways away from that reclamation plant. So it's
Understand.
not, but point well taken.
Yeah, Jeff, following up with what Stacy just said, there was also a tremendous die-off of oaks in Placerita Canyon during those drought years, which again means that the water table had gone disastrously low. And I would agree with Stacy that perhaps we should be thinking of a higher minimum threshold.
Okay. Well, those are important considerations that we've got to consider here for this. I think, just to answer the question of why we picked levels that we did, is that, we knew that you could pump the alluvium at the rates we did historically and what we predict to occur in future pumping and still have sustainability as far as supply. But that's the question about whether you impact those hardwoods, you impact the GDEs is another related question. And I think those are good points. We're going to get into this in much more detail in our next meeting, where we're going to be talking about depletion of surface water, interconnected surface water, and we're going to be talking about GDEs and how we would propose to deal with those kind of conditions that you just described.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess the last point I would make regarding this existing production well, don't focus on the values that you see here. Our report is going to have elevations that we pick once we get the whole full network together. These are initial thresholds. We think we can pump the Saugus actually even more than we do now. It's an important supply for the basin, for the citizens of the basin, and that'll be something that'll be evaluated more in the future. As an initial threshold, though, we decided to work completely within the operating plan, and therefore we set it at this level, but it could change down the road. So I'm going to talk briefly about the next sustainability indicator, and that's reduction of groundwater and storage. As I mentioned before with that example, this indicator is very much tied to water levels. So you lower water levels, you reduce the amount of water in storage. So the minimum thresholds for and measurable objectives for water level decline indicator will be referred to for this indicator for groundwater and storage. We want to make sure we have enough water in storage to get through extended drought. And as I mentioned, for the Saugus aquifer, the minimum threshold is considered an interim or initial level, subject to change. because it might be, we think it's possible to pump the Saugus more than it has been in the past to provide resiliency during drought without causing undesirable results, but that's to be further evaluated. And then the measurable objective, again, for storage, it's very much tied to those water levels that I mentioned for the other indicator. For subsidence, we're moving forward with an additional geotechnical evaluation. We did an evaluation based on available subsidence data from satellite imagery. It showed that basically you can't tell if there's ever been any subsidence, at least since the year 2000. We don't think there has been. We don't think this aquifer or this geology is likely going to experience subsidence with the predicted water levels that we see, but we're going to look at it more closely with the geotechnical evaluation that'll show up in this report. That'll help us set what those minimum thresholds or allowable amount of settlement ought to be. It'll be a recommendation for that. Our measurable objective, our target is to have no subsidence. So, and these will be measured at monitoring locations. There will be a monitoring plan specifically associated with subsidence. So monitoring considerations for SMCs or sustainable management criteria. So we, as I've mentioned, we expect future changes in water levels responding to climate. We've estimated those with the groundwater model to derive these criteria or thresholds. But it's the actual monitoring data, it's the proof in the pudding from the monitoring is the key to understanding whether or not we have undesirable results and we're meeting our sustainability goal and our thresholds. And so based on the monitoring that we're planning to do, that we're starting to build a monitoring plan now that you'll have an opportunity to review. The GSA may consider adjusting thresholds to avoid impacts to GDEs, just as was mentioned earlier, or allow flexibility to changing pumping patterns, especially in the Saugus, if we don't think undesirable results are likely. So we already had some questions, some good questions, and I was just wondering if this is a pause. We're near the end. So I just wanted to pause to see if anybody else had more comments.
I haven't seen anything in chat, but this is a chance for any members of the committee that want to ask any more. I know we've sort of been jumping in.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, home stretch, Jeff.
All right. So I'm just going to go back up to the goal again, just real quick. As you just reflect on this, we're going to reflect on it more each time we go through these sustainable management criteria, like next time, the next meeting, to see if this actually is reflective of your values and your interests in the basin. So it's a balance between meeting supply objectives and also balancing environmental needs in the river values.
Any specific comments, questions about this?
All right, well, let me move on to the last slide here just to get past all that. So our next steps, oops, and this is what we're planning for the January 27th meeting. And again, it's going to be a presentation on water quality degradation issues. And I know there's already been a question forwarded to me on that, and we'll be prepared to answer. And depletion of interconnected surface water. So we'll be talking about undesirable results, minimum thresholds, measurable objectives. We're going to talk about our approach to evaluating and responding to impacts to GDEs, important topic. And then, you know, in the end, we want to go back once we've kind of settled on where we want these thresholds to be. We need to go back and revisit to make sure that we didn't inadvertently cause an undesirable result because of some threshold that we set further in the process. So that's just a step that DWR expects us to go through. With that, if there are more questions or comments, I'm interested to hear.
This is Sandra. I do have one more question. And that is, if you see that there are areas that have sustainability problems or are lower in their levels than, say, other areas of the city, would those be candidates that you would talk to the city or the county about going to the WASC committee and perhaps having projects to capture stormwater?
Sandra, this is Rick. I don't think Jeff, the WASC is the Watershed Area Steering Committee, and it does a lot with stormwater and things like that.
Great, thank you. So a couple thoughts. First, within the plan, we're going to attempt to identify whether we have seen undesirable results or we expect them. So do we need to have a recharge project to maintain water levels or habitat, or we need to make some improvements through land use changes to address issues? The GSA's got to work within its area of responsibility, as I'm sure you know. And I think that in the future, once the GSP is adopted, and let's say we discover in the future, with monitoring in the future, that we see a concern in a particular area, as you point out, the GSA has the ability to move forward with a project or management action or collaboration with another agency to try to address that issue as it relates to the sustainability criteria and the sustainability issues that the GSA has authority to deal with. I guess I just bring that up.
Thank you.
Well, all good questions. I hope I didn't make you all go to sleep.
No, all good questions and a very good presentation again. And the prep we did before I found very helpful. Any other questions from the committee or comments at this point?
Well, this is just a comment I would like to make, Jeff and Rick, and to Rick, that I may sound like a broken record, but to me, one of the issues that we have here in the Santa Clarita Valley area is getting water to the east side. And any way we can, I'm going to be, on board on. And obviously monitoring what's going on the east side is going to be a very important component of being able to ameliorate the problem. Obviously, first, we want to assess the problem.
Right. Good point. And it's totally within the purview of this plan. And,
Thank you. So sorry to keep bugging
no,
you.
it's fine. I know there are issues because that end of the basin, it drains more quickly during drought, so we see the alluvial aquifers start to drain out and the water levels go down, and there's just less recharge, and so well production is affected by that. And
well, yeah, unless we want to drill out the base of our aquifer, we're always going to have that problem.
Right.
Because it's tilted.
Yep. So when we get to projects and management actions, if we find that we do have an undesirable condition, it's in those projects and management actions where that would show up.
Hey, Holly.
Yeah, Dan.
Dan, I'd like to comment on that. Yeah, it's appropriate that we look at the groundwater extractions on the east side, but if the groundwater levels there are no different than they have been historically, not like we need to move water to the east end, because if you look at the costs of doing so, it's extremely expensive to build the infrastructure, pump it up to the east end, only to have it flow down, or basically flow through the alluvium downstream. Yeah, especially if you're thinking about treated recycled water, treated effluent from the wastewater reclamation plants that are on the west end. I think the question needs to be asked, and Jeff and staff need to answer it. You know, are the water levels on the east end affected by downstream pumping, which I already know the answer to? It's not. It might be affected by pumping in that area, principally the small pumpers, those that have any wells in those specific locations. But extractions downstream of those locations that Sandra is talking about effectively don't affect the groundwater levels on the east end. You know, and Jeff and staff can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I know we have the ability to look at that, and we will. I think that's a good question. I know John Pacello's on the phone here on the call, so we'll look at that question.
Yeah.
And I think it's
you
also
raised a good-
important to flag that when we get into talking about projects and programs and those things. I think what the question is if we identify that issue, what is the right action, and not one that's just not really solving a problem. I think that's what we want to make sure we're analyzing.
Yeah, this is kind of an example of what I was describing when you get through this SMC process and you've identified undesirable results. And let's say we want to recover water levels on the east end during drought periods. Let's just say that hypothetically. And then we develop some projects and management actions around that, whether that's a big pipeline that goes up there or whatever it happens to be, to recharge that area to bring water up there. And the price tag is at, I don't know, $50 million. That's a case where everybody's got to swallow hard and decide, okay, is that affordable? Is that implementable given our other priorities? And that's where we might choose to revisit our thresholds and goals. I'm not saying there's a problem with that, focusing on that. It's just, there's a bit of, can we address it question affordably.
Other questions or comments from the committee? Tara, then I think let's go to the public comment step. Do we have anybody who is submitted for public comment? Otherwise, you can go forward with the unmuting briefly process.
And then remuting.
Please.
I don't see anything that somebody wants to say publicly in the comments. I will ask all to unmute. Does anyone else from the public have any questions, comments? Hearing none, there are no public comments.
Okay. Rick, Jeff, thank you for walking us through those criteria. We have part 2 of the other indicators coming later this month. So if there's I guess I'll give the committee just one more moment to see if there's any other questions or comments. I know it's a lot to digest. And if not, we will move on to the final item, which is really just to see whether or not there are any other agenda items that we need to be thinking about for future meeting, either at that meeting on the 27th, where we go through the other indicators, or another future meeting. All right, then, Tara, is there any other business that we need to conduct today?
Nothing that isn't on the agenda, so.
Great. Great. Well, then thank you, everybody, for your participation today and being there and reviewing the documents. I want to thank staff for getting the presentation out a little bit in advance this afternoon. That was very helpful. And with that, I'll adjourn the meeting and wish everyone to have a wonderful evening.
Same to you. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all for the presentation.
Thank you.